What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So I see a lot of people calling for Sony to go back in time and pick out some of their older intellectual properties and series, and it does seem like they keep hinting that they're hearing everyone, and in fact, they did it once again in a recent interview, and we're going to go over some of that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a certain controller from Microsoft that leaked out a while ago, disappeared, and now it looks like it's shown up again, maybe giving us a glimpse at their next generation offering. And then we also have, believe it or not, a Dreamcast port of a PlayStation 2 title that was incredibly popular, we've discussed before, but now it looks like at least an early build of Grand Theft Auto 3 is available to play on real hardware, and we'll take a look at that. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton, and if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below, and of course, members of the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video, and we're going to start today with Sony and the PlayStation Portal that is now more than 1 year old, and when it came out, it was kind of confusing for a lot of us when we saw it because, one, it looked kind of strange, but two, it wasn't the handheld we were hoping to hear about. Nonetheless, it seems like Sony has been pretty happy with what they've seen from this device so far, and we can see this is posted up. This is by Steven Dattilo over on GameFile, did an entire interview and write-up here on the PlayStation Portal, talking with some of the product management people at Sony, and they actually shared an interesting stat, saying the most popular time of day for PlayStation Portal owners to use their Portal streaming device is 9 p.m. Now, this is from a Sony executive telling GameFile, and they actually shared some of their reasoning they believe for this, saying this could suggest scenarios like users playing on the console first, then later switching to PlayStation Portal to play in another room, courtesy of PS Portal's characteristics like the ability to play in another room while their family is using the TV. So the idea is they see PlayStation 5, the play time there typically peaking at 8 p.m., and then the Portal an hour later at 9. And that's exactly what Sony was looking for with a device like this. Can it keep people engaged even away from the TV? So it does make more and more sense hearing stuff like this and some of their internal findings and statistics that we could actually see a legitimate handheld from Sony, maybe with their next generation launch, probably in like 2028. So we're a ways off, but it does appear like the groundwork is being laid. Also, we did hear from Square Enix once again around the idea of multi-platform for some of their big franchises, especially Final Fantasy. This we could see was posted up and translated. This one is over on Reset Era. It was from IGN Brazil, and this is from a producer with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth saying, while we are confident and happy that we're reaching a certain level of sales, that being for FF7 Rebirth, it is clear that with the modernity of games, we cannot be exclusive to a single platform. I think we need to offer the game to as many players as possible. Yeah, I mean, we all know that at this. I mean, it's not shocking to see that a game like Remake and then Rebirth, both of which just launching specifically on PlayStation hardware first, then eventually went to other systems, yeah, you're gonna just reach less people. And then a sequel that's relying on the previous one because of the direct path when it comes to the storyline, yeah, you're gonna sell even less then. So the faster I think they can get this game out to just more and more platforms, I'm not just talking about PC, the staggered PC launch we've already seen does hurt just sales in general. They would get more if they launched PlayStation 5 and PC day one, but also just looking to maybe get more consoles on board as they roll up to that third entry. The issue is, clearly, Sony has seemingly the deal with them so that it does stay on PlayStation hardware day one and then go to other platforms. This will just be something I assume Sony will be thinking about more so in the future, especially when it comes to something like Final Fantasy XVII. Oh, and we have some more sales news for Nier Automata, which I swear we hear news about this thing when it comes to the sales every year almost. Well, now it's hit another milestone, this over on Gamatsu. Nier Automata total worldwide shipments and digital sales have exceeded 9 million units. This was officially announced by Square. You know, again, this is impressive. It's like a, yes, it's kind of a long tail. It's an evergreen title, I guess, at this point. It's just, the sales are just consistent. And yes, it's gone to other platforms like the Switch, for example, but clearly, we're going to hear news about the next Nier game here, I think pretty soon. And in fact, it's already been teased that 2025 could be setting up to have some sort of reveal for the Nier franchise. That's exciting stuff. But yeah, Automata, continue to roll along. If you haven't played it, highly recommend it, and it seems like a lot of people have at least found it themselves with the sales continuing. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Sony and some of their old legacy intellectual properties, ones that we do see pop up quite a bit now on PlayStation Plus Premium for PS1 and PS2 games, but also more so even in like the mainstream with Astrobot that pays homage to a bunch of older properties from Sony and even third-party companies, which is a lot of fun. Sure, it's like small slices of the game technically because you find a bot that's dressed up like Sly Cooper, and then it'll do fun little animations when you punch them at the crash site and stuff. But you don't necessarily play a Sly Cooper game. Some games you do, which I don't want to spoil it, which is really, really cool stuff. But when we see this in Astrobot, I think many of us sit there with the nostalgia goggles on and go, man, I'd really like to see a new Sly Cooper game, right? That'd be awesome. Well, it does at least sound like Sony is at least paying attention, sort of. We can see this is posted up. This is actually from Famitsu, and it's with one of the CEOs, the co-CEO, Herman Holst. This is Google Translate saying, the various IPs that we own are an important asset to PlayStation. And as part of our efforts to strengthen our portfolio, we're continuing looking at opportunities to leverage past IP as well as develop new franchises. Which I feel like Sony has been asked about this a lot over the last couple of years, but certainly more so even after Astrobot came out, that really highlighted so many of those older franchises. I'm sure some that people completely forgot about and some that didn't even recognize. There were a few bots that I saved and I was like, what is this? And I'd like go look and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even know about that game necessarily. And it was like a small niche title that sold like 50,000 copies if it was lucky, maybe on the PS1. But still, it was neat to just see it recognized in Astrobot. And in a way, you kind of introduce it to a new generation with the younger audience. So like at my house, for example, Astrobot is recognized alongside of Mario with the kids, and they even ask about some of the bots that they save. Like, what's this ape escape thing? What does that mean exactly, right? What is Sly Cooper? Those are things that at least come up in conversation after they save the bots, and it's interesting to try to explain that to them, and then they start checking out Sly Cooper with the PlayStation Plus Premium, and they really like that, and now in their mind, they're like, oh, is there gonna be a new Sly Cooper game at some point? So that, like, at least the path is there to get a newer generation on board, but they also have to then commit to doing something with it. That's the thing. They can talk all they want, but eventually you'd like to see some action from Sony. And it's not even just like games from the PS2 era. There are games from the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 era that people are wondering, man, it'd be great if Infamous came back. And it's not even that old, technically. If you think about it, it was a PlayStation 4 title with Second Son, and then First Light, that was like a year or two later. But you go back and think of Resistance, which would be interesting to see come back. A Killzone, that launched PS4 title even. So there's a lot there they can do. And even outside of just games, clearly we see them making a push for other forms of media with TV or streaming services at this point, and the big screen with movies. Now, Herman Holst also talked about some of their partnerships, going on to explain that his company's priority is to publish games by the world's best creators, and insinuated it'll continue to work alongside of independent outfits like Team Ninja, they did Rise of the Ronin, or Shift Up with Stellar Blade, to publish exclusives from outside its internal network of first-party studios, saying, quote, we have achieved many successes so far by working closely with external development studios. And it makes a lot of sense for them to continue doing that because, we see how long it takes their internal studios to make games because, yes, they have a certain level of quality and stuff they try to hit internally, but also just games in general are taking a while to create. And many of these companies also understand it's very expensive. So yeah, if you can go to Sony, a big publisher, and get some extra reinforcements when it comes to funding in exchange for this timed exclusivity, yeah, you're probably going to make that move because it seems like Sony does let you eventually go to PC, as we're seeing with something like Stellar Blade that was talked about here. So I would expect them to continue signing these sorts of deals going forward, probably I'd say to fill in the gaps when it comes to their first party stuff throughout a year to help hold up what's really, really important to them still is that console at the center of everything with the PlayStation 5. Next up, let's talk about that Xbox next generation controller that leaked out during the whole Microsoft versus FTC case, and many things got out there that weren't redacted correctly, where we saw that Brooklyn Xbox that ended up not coming out. And then we saw this controller, which actually, if you look over on Windows Central that we'll be citing here, they do have one of the slides, and that's for Sebile. And you can see all the different features that they were going to bake in here. And in fact, it appears it's still in the works. This we can see from Windows Central, where they say the patent describes how the pulses and vibrations can be tuned to mimic a wide variety of sounds and motions, and can even move independently of the controller's housing. So what's happened is a patent has been discovered that is clearly showing off Sebile. So the fact that it seems to still be getting worked on and would make sense for them to move in this direction, it kind of lines up at least with how much Microsoft has been talking about maybe getting the jump on Sony when it comes to a next generation offering coming out sooner. Say crucially, it also suggests that the haptic motors will be able to mimic previous style vibrations for backwards compatibility purposes, limiting the need for developers to intervene to make their games work on the new controller. And I mean, that would be a major plus to have that. The ability for developers not to have to go in and specifically code and design for these newer rumble motors would be, I mean, incredibly helpful, especially for backwards compatibility that we know is very important for Microsoft. If they can pull the NVIDIA and say it just works, yeah, do that. I want to say another interesting aspect of Sebile is the fact it will borrow a feature from Stadia, in that it will connect directly to the cloud games over Wi-Fi. So what we would see here is with Stadia, you would actually connect your controller, that Stadia controller, to your hotspot or your router at home, and that way it would bypass having to go through your system, whether at that time it would have been your phone or your PC or your TV or Chromecast. It would take care of everything itself and just take one other piece of machinery out of the equation when it comes to communication and different endpoints there. So that would also make a lot of sense for Microsoft, since you could technically then go between devices very easily because your controller's not connected to it. So let's say you turn the game off on your TV and then you want to go over to your computer. Well, the controller's been connected to the game the whole time. You just legitimately switch windows and devices. And it's actually a really cool feature for Stadia, so I think bringing it over here with something like Sebile would make a lot of sense for Microsoft's cloud gaming initiative. And then the last bit here, Windows Central is hearing that this controller won't launch before the next range of Xbox hardware, which, again, it's been rumored late 2026, maybe 2027. The controller, actually, out of that entire FTC leak, was the thing I was most interested in, because their pitch for Brooklyn was adorably all digital, and I'm like, oh, well, that's not something I'm that interested in. But Sebile, all the things that they showed off, the advanced haptic feedback for the rumble, the idea of connecting directly to your router for cloud gaming, it all made a lot of sense for that next generation controller that I think should have been the Xbox Series controller in general. The fact we're still working with those older rumble motors, it's just strange at this point, seeing what Sony and Nintendo have been able to do so far. So yeah, I'm on board with this. I would definitely be picking up a Sebile controller even just for cloud gaming away from my system, because it does have, I think, a very convenient nature to it. And that's the big thing for cloud gaming, is convenience, but it seems like it's going to be a little while before we see this, probably a couple of years. Next up, let's talk about a Dreamcast port that has been released, although it's very early days for it, but technically you can now run GTA 3, Grand Theft Auto 3, on your Dreamcast, which many people thought would be impossible, but it seems like it's a thing right now. We can see this posted up over on Twitter X. This is from Falco's, as surprise, the alpha release of Grand Theft Auto 3 running on the Sega Dreamcast is here. And they show an actual hardware capture they took from their Dreamcast while doing some physics engine optimization work. Over the last several months, a ragtag team of indie Dreamcast developers and GTA fans assembled to take on what seemed to many be an impossible feat: port GTA 3 to the Sega Dreamcast. Now, they link to a GitLab, and you can go there and download the files required. I will tell you this, though, it's not straightforward. It's not like, oh, I'm going to download this and it's going right on a CDR that I'm going to burn to and drop it in the Dreamcast, or put it on your GDEMU, the SD card, and just load it up that way. You actually have to have a copy of Grand Theft Auto 3, and they do point to one that at least works, or they've shown works, and that's like the Grand Theft Auto, the trilogy. And what happens is the files they have here, along with some of the programs, I believe pulls the assets and sets things up, and that's sort of how they're able to get around Rockstar or Take-Two coming in and knocking them out with the DMCA and stuff, because they're not actually using assets in their program or their build. You need to have a legitimate copy to pull from. And we've seen that with decompilations. You got to find a ROM somewhere, and that's how they separate themselves from the copywritten work, right? So in this case, same thing. And there are many steps there. So this is also like alpha territory, so it seems like a lot of it's probably not going to be working the best, and is more so just for maybe more technically minded people who are really into checking out the development status of different games, in this case on the Dreamcast, because GTA 3, that is very, very interesting to see running, and it seems like they still have a ways to go, and this is just a fun public release they can put out there for people to try out. So if you want to go through the steps and set up a build for your Dreamcast, an image to put on a CDR or your GDEMU, you can do that. I'll leave it linked down below in the sources. And in our last bit of news, sticking with the Dreamcast, we're actually going to go over Shenmue and how apparently there was a PlayStation 2 port of the game that never saw the light of day. Now, this was in an interview with Famitsu and many developers who worked on Shenmue, just kind of sharing some of their stories and reminiscing on the development process, the release, and unfortunately, the subsequent shutdown of the Dreamcast and Sega's console aspirations in the market. But we can see this posted up. This is translated once again from Famitsu. And this was talking about the PS2 version, saying, I actually made a PlayStation 2 version of Chapter 1. It was never released, but internally, there was a version that ran on the PlayStation 2. I also made an Xbox version, but only Shenmue 2 was released in North America. Going to say it never made it to release, but it was ported. Also, speaking of porting, the Xbox version of Chapter 1 was not released. I think it was due to rights issues, not technical issues. You see, it was tied with real companies like Timex watches and Coca-Cola drinks. That contract was only for the Dreamcast version of Chapter 1, so I think it was shelved for reasons such as not being able to be used on other consoles, which is, man, that's unfortunate. Because, look, Shenmue had no shot on the Dreamcast. There weren't even enough Dreamcasts out there to make the money back. Like, if they sold apparently a copy of Shenmue to every person who had a Dreamcast at the time, it wasn't going to recoup the amount of money they spent on that game. It was that expensive. And then you hear, oh, we had a PS2 version that we could have released. Oh, that's tough. One, I would have been curious just to see how that would have ended up looking on the PlayStation 2, as apparently they had to do a lot of work to at least get it up and running on the GPU with the different shaders. So it could have maybe ran differently, better or worse even. May have looked even a little softer, because the Dreamcast did look very sharp on CRTs, for example, just the way that it like rendered the graphics and visuals and stuff. But it would have just been interesting to see it on the PS2, and it would have had a much better shot on a significantly larger install base, and that's the missed opportunity. Shenmue, I think, could have really even taken off more so than it did. Look, Shenmue is this game that is like embedded in video game history because of what it was and what it was able to accomplish at that time. But you put it in front of a ton of people on the PS2, it may have been able to recoup its costs. It's hard to say, really, but what a shame that we hear about this now. Oh yeah, there was a PS2 version working, but we couldn't put it out along with the Xbox version, seemingly because of Timex and Coca-Cola. That's rough. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, which is Game of the Year Madness. Let's see, we have Tekken 8 going up against Black Myth Wukong. And it does look like Black Myth Wukong is running away with it here at the time of this recording, 63% to 37%. And actually, over the weekend, we had Indiana Jones overtake Helldivers 2. So the bracket is getting pretty interesting here, and we have some other fun matchups coming up here throughout this week. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from BK saying, when it comes to the Switch leak, never trust a person who wears their watch over their sweater sleeve. Yeah, it was kind of a new one for me. I mean, I don't have like a smartwatch or anything right now. I actually had one a while. It was like Galaxy Watch. And when I had like long sleeve, it would still also go over it or get bunched up, at the top of it. Don't really know about the watch over the long sleeve. And that was something that people were looking at like, is that AI? Are you trying to cover up maybe a tattoo on your arm that's an identifying feature? Because again, we've talked about Nintendo. If you have something there that they might be able to track down, Nintendo will. So maybe that's the, can you cover up my arm as well while you're changing the background, talking to AI? And they put a long sleeve with a a watch over the sleeve rather than underneath the, yeah, I don't know. Hey, you know what? Let me know if you have a watch right now and you have the long sleeve, does it go over the watch, or are you somebody that actually puts the watch over the sleeve? Ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed last week's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card, or maybe you wanted to hear a bit more about some wild stuff happening when it comes to new Switch games not actually being in the case for people who open them over the holidays. I'll leave that right below it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.